Jargon is the vocabulary used by experts in a field to describe their field of work. It is not created out of necessity, but of convenience, because all metalinguistic symbol sets, mathematic notation, or symbolic logic can be reduced to simpler strings of common words. So no matter what field you're engaging in, no matter how formalized, it all is simply a discussion. It all simply is humans discussing through language. It's just that people in a particular field will tend to use metalinguistic symbol sets, which allow a facility in describing certain topics. Now, I do think that these things are important. Myself, I try to be involved in philosophy to whatever degree of specialization I'm capable, and to that extent, I will use philosophical language to describe my concepts. That's just because I think that the jargon of philosophy most encompasses all other jargon systems. It's a meta-language that you can describe other systems with. But again, I only use those things because they bear a utility to me, not because the using of bigger words makes an idea any more right. I actually do worry sometimes how I'm coming across because I do use a particular type of vocabulary somewhat subconsciously. When I'm talking with Kyle, as I'm going through my explanations, I don't really have a clear picture of what's going to happen next. I'm just sort of forming some sort of abstract representation of the thoughts that are going on in my head. But I don't really have a sense of propriety over them. And so it's hard for me then to control my use of idiom or diction, because it's when I'm doing it right, it's just something that sort of happens, and I don't really have a clear say in how I'm going to form my sentences. I don't really know that a lot of people do know how they form their sentences. Language tends to be a instinctual enough thing that for the most part, you can just coast on without really ever having to develop some meta theory of the structure that you're using. I mean, linguistics didn't exist for most of the time that language existed. Before people understood language to be a information system in its own, they still used it. And that's the interesting thing about language, is that all of this sort of formalization, or the establishment of mutually compatible metalinguistic symbol structures to theorize of reality, it leads us to the perception that we're really the first people to understand reality, because things like the current generation of metalinguistic symbol structures haven't existed before, and so we seem to be unique in some respect. And we are, just in terms of the complexity of the manifestations of these ideas. They're being justified by linguistic devices far more complex than have been used by people of ancient cultures. But nevertheless, as I've said, the jargon is reducible to simple terms, and all the simple terms have already been said. That's the issue of this, is that the Tao Te Ching has already been written. We already know the nature of it. It really resides in the very base capturing of our thought space through language. It's in the very base levels of it that you can really describe what's going on fundamentally. I mean, there are many theories as to why people started having religious instincts. Why do people believe in something beyond? And I don't think that most people are willing to give our predecessors enough credit to say, hey, maybe they developed a theory of reality and concluded that they are part of a divine system. You notice the pagan religions, almost always, their creation myths tie the population to the heroes and gods. Whatever is divine in reality, the pagans understood it to be tied to our function in nature. And it really can't be broken down any simpler than that. Whatever is going on is nature. There is nothing supernatural, because all that is nature. So whatever divinity we may have, whatever purpose humanity may have, lies in its relation to nature. And they also recognized that nature is something that cycles around. All time is cyclical, and the ancient people knew this. It was obvious to them. Now, they didn't really understand the long concepts of geological time or cosmological time, but they did understand that humanity is a part of a cycling process, and that's really the biological time that is relevant to us in the first place anyway. There was a recognition of the eternal return. of the snake eating itself. Now, just because they didn't use metalinguistic symbol set, even though they did, they used symbol sets, and that was their metaphysics. That was how they discussed these concepts, was by symbolizing them. I mean, in that sense, religion sort of evolves out of necessity to abstractly represent the metaphysics that is just conversation of reality. Talking about reality as it is metaphysics, because physics is the study of the physical world and the sense phenomenon that we're able to experience. That's physics, because it's studying what the Greek sort of physic is in more a word about nature than about abstract reality. I mean, to the Greeks, a metaphysics really did make sense in describing reality, because reality is, as far as we can tell, not necessarily all the physical realm. There seem to be realms of abstract information beyond just the phenomenon that we experience. There seems to be equations and principles that stand beyond time, beyond the particular manifestation of nature. So they didn't need empirical science to validate to them what was already obvious. The basic truth of reality, they pretty much got. And that's the issue. Whatever the nature of reality is, you would expect its nature to permeate its essence. If there is some computer running somewhere that's calculating on the nature of reality, it only can draw from reality, because reality is all that is. And since we are a computer that's modeling reality, we will draw from the one thing that is common to all. And so its essence will be apparent no matter which forms we look at. Everything is fundamentally the same, in that it all is information systems. And that's not the way that our ancestors would have put it. But it's another simple way of putting it that I think works. Reality processes from singularity to singularity in everything. And that is one of those foundational truths. Without that knowledge, we're acting under false pretenses in our lives. If we believe that time is linear, moving only forward, and that it's a flat line going off into infinity, then we really tend to think of our actions here as being of a vital importance. And that's really not the way that cyclical time has us look at it. Cyclical time has us being responsible for the reoccurrence of the same natural cycle that we're all enjoying. You know, we are codependently related with the rest of being, and we need to respect that relationship. And so nature is something to be feared and worshipped, not because there is some divine necessity for it, but because it's a pragmatic worship of that which really has you by the balls. You have to concede to the nature of the system that you operate in. You have to concede to the nature of reality. And if the nature of reality is singularity leading into singularity, if the nature of reality is information systems infinitely recurring in parallel to one another, then that has to sort of form the basis of your pragmatic approach to interacting with these systems. But that's a different topic. Thanks for listening.